Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily. It features a conversation with composer Jonah Senzel, who wrote the music for Inscryption. Inscryption hasn't been out very long, and it's doing really well. It is a deck builder, a card-based deck builder with roguelike elements, escape room elements, psychological horror. It's all there, and Jonah's music is great. One of my favorite things about Jonah's music is it's kind of a little all over the place in terms of style. So there's music that is built largely off of sound effects, but there's also this really beautiful slow 8-bit contemplative kind of musical soliloquy that happens that I really love. There's Nintendo Wii bossa nova. It's fun. It's really fun. So I really enjoyed speaking with Jonah about it. I encourage you to visit Jonah's website just to learn a little bit more about him. We didn't get too much into his extra musical activities, but he's an interesting guy. He likes to build things, hardware and software. So you can learn a little bit more about that on his website. I encourage you to do that. Join us on Discord to talk about this and other episodes. That link is down in the show notes. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. That would be fantastic. One thing about YouTube, we don't traditionally put music in the YouTube episodes. For that, you need to go to the audio podcast, which I strongly encourage you to listen to the audio version, just because that's the real deal. That's the experience we intend you to have, and you'll hear a lot of Jonah's music in there, which is really fun. And if you're able to support us financially on Patreon, that'd be awesome. We also have merch. You can find a link down in the show notes for that if you want a Level with Emily t-shirt or coffee cup or onesie. All right. Well, thanks for checking us out. Here is Jonah Senzel talking about Inscryption. If you want to just start off with just introduce yourself and then tell us what Inscryption is, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of your music.
Oh, well, one of those is kind of easier than the other one, I guess. I don't know. No, they're both kind of hard. I'm Jonah Senzel. I do game audio and music, mostly for Daniel Mullins, who has made 3 games, Pony Island, The Hex, and most recently Inscryption. I do a bunch of other stuff, too, and have many lives and different things, but I would say that's, I guess... In this forum, that's my role as a person. And Inscryption is a roguelike deck builder horror game that has many twists, turns, meta elements, games within games, and lots of different sounds that I designed and lots of different music that I wrote. So yeah, it's been quite successful, I suppose.
Yeah, it has. And, there's a lot of music in the game. Talk a little bit about how it operates.
The music or the game?
Yeah. How's the music act in the game?
Well, there's sort of there's some themes that are very themey and very melodic and stuff that happen, I guess, mostly in the in-between sections. And then when you're actually playing the card game, there's a lot of sort of more slow background ambient music. Whether some of it is electronic, some of it is ambient sort of drony stuff with some guitar and flute and real instruments over it. And that's more kind of backwaters, folksy, horror, creepy. But yeah, so it's sort of the music generally kind of plays in between trying to let you concentrate during the strategy parts. And then if there's a specific battle, like a boss fight, there'll be there'll be a theme, and most of those are layered to some extent. So there'll be sort of A and B sections for when different things are happening during the game, that sort of clue you in on oh, and now it's the enemy boss's turn, and they're big and scary, and their big scary theme comes up. And yeah, in the later sections of the game, there's also more, I guess, what you would call traditional kind of melodic video gamey, start to finish tracks too.
Yeah. There were a couple of things that stood out to me kind of overall as I was listening that I really, really liked. And I did love how many tracks there are that use like found sound or Foley or maybe even kind of in a musique concrète kind of way, if we think about it really traditionally speaking, but like just all these external non-musical quote unquote instruments or, well, not non-musical instruments, but non-musical sounds, right? So, like there's a track called The Angler, and there are all kinds of water-y sounds or like ship kind of traditional sounds that make you think of that. And then, the Prospector, you hear mining sounds and, like there's some disturbing sounds in the Trapper that I want to know more about. But so that's one of the things I really liked. And then I also liked how, and certainly this isn't the case with every single track, nor is the sound effects thing, but a lot of improvisatory feel, like a lot of kind of just like give or take with like where you're going to be putting a melody or how that melody is interacting within the bounds of like a meter or time. Like, I don't know. I liked those two aspects of the soundtrack overall.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the improvisatory stuff, like for example, in the first main long droney track was all sort of non strict time, me sitting down and improvising with like a main melody and then doing some variations, but just having a guitar, doing a couple of different takes and then cutting those up and then doing some different stuff with this weird bamboo flute sound. And there's some of that also in different sections of the game of like me sitting down, trying some stuff out, and then cutting it back up and like having it be really loose with the time stuff. I do like to play a lot of stuff live and then maybe cut it up and change it later, but having it be like rather than writing it in on the grid. There's a lot of stuff that I will write in on the grid, but not like if it's a melody or if it's chords. Usually I start out playing it live. Whether that's like recorded audio or a MIDI instrument or something like that. And the sound stuff, that was a lot of direction from Dan, because he was basically like, I want to do something that's going to be mood setting, but it shouldn't be too distracting, or like distracting isn't exactly the word it's kind of like there's a sort of a way to score media that's kind of the like John Williams-y or approach. I guess it's kind of funny to give John Williams credit for that, because it's like really old, but like it's opera, let's say. But and that kind of wasn't what the game called for. I think it would have been a little cheesy, and it would have been a little bit like too loopy because it's a roguelike as well. So you're going to be hearing the same stuff a lot. A little too distracting when you're trying to like focus on the card stuff. What you really want is to evoke like dread or this like ambiance or this creepiness. And so he suggested that we have layered things where it's like, okay, we're gonna have one kind of sparse theme thing on top that's going to come in sometimes, but the base layers are going to be these like rhythmic sound effect things. And that was super fun to do. I mean, he came out with, I think, he was just like, oh, you should put a pickaxe sound in somewhere. And then I like that and was like, okay, it's going to be all pickaxe sounds, and then it's going to be something else, and then it's going to be this. Yeah, that was super fun, and I really like playing around with recorded audio and making it into kind of musical elements.
Is that how you kind of started? Were you experimenting that way all through your development as a composer?
I would say like some of my personal music has more of that. Like I've written some sort of like experimental folk-ish stuff that has some sample elements. I have always written hip hop beats and stuff like that, and like weird ones, and sampling is a big part of that. So there's a lot of like taking audio, chopping it to sort of fit somewhere that it shouldn't or that it doesn't, and then working back around it, and that being really cool and fun, and kind of like splicing different audio things together. I guess also I was probably doing some stuff like that in music school, and doing some weird like, oh, we're gonna do a project that's all like this sampled sound, and you're gonna resample it and do all this weird stuff. And Yeah. So I mean, but yeah, I think for me it was very natural to use Foley elements as musical elements. That is something that I think I've always been drawn towards.
Yeah, cool. Well, since we're on the topic, do tell me about the Trapper, because I mean, just tell me about it. I don't want to speculate.
Well, it's funny, like all the Foley stuff, I was doing those tracks with a pretty quick turnaround. So I was mostly pulling from, actually, this is a resource that I'm going to shout out, Splice, which is a sample service. You can
Nice.
subscribe to them, you can get samples from them, royalty free or whatever it is, whatever, you can use them legally. And yeah, they're not very used in the game audio world. I don't think they're really more of like for music, but they have a great library of all different kinds of stuff. So most of the Foley things there started out as Splice samples, and then they get kind of transformed to some extent. So the really gross stuff in the Trapper, I think, is probably somebody unrolling tape, if I had to guess.
Oh, okay. But your intent is like
Skin ripping.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
You're supposed to be like skinning something at some sort of, you're like putting something
you're a
on
trapper. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that's really like, there's so much context. It's just like the classic things of seeing, people with like a watermelon or a grapefruit, and you can make all these gross sounds as long as it's paired with the right suggestion, right? As long as the brain is being told like, hey, get ready for something gross, and then it's like, this is the sound of an orange being squished, but it feels like, it's the sound of a brain or something. But yeah, I think with those, the fun and interesting part was also trying to find where they sit in, like those sounds, for example, are not in rhythm. There's like sawing, and there's those ripping sounds that aren't in rhythm. But the rhythm ones, I think, in the Trapper are like knives. Which the knives I actually recorded by myself.
Okay.
There's a lot of, like for something like doing Inscryption as a solo sound designer and composer, it was kind of like I had to kind of be real about what sounds I was gonna record myself and which ones I was gonna source. And most of the source sounds also, I was lucky to have a project that was flexible, that this when I source a sound, I get to do something weird with it, so I can feel like I'm still putting a spin on it. Like the bell, for example, in Angler is like started out as a normal bell sound, and then I did some weird stuff with this sort of like decayed like pitch thing. Anyway, that all being said, the sounds that I really wanted to do by myself and have a kind of library that I recorded myself to pull from were a lot of those cabin sounds of like knives, wooden objects, different kind of like old rusty tool sounds, or clicking and metal stuff. So the knives in the Trapper and the little shing is like actually a kitchen knife, which I basically took out a mic and took out a kitchen knife, and I was like, well, there's no way I'm going to get the Hollywood sound. I figured that was kind of some fake thing that they did some other way. But you can just like kind of graze a knife against a thing, and it goes like, pring, it does the like crazy. I was like, what? That's real? Like you can just do that? And so I recorded a bunch of those, and those went into the Trapper, which was fun.
Nice. How did you become? I mean, I know that you've done other games before, but how did you two meet?
Well, we met on Reddit actually.
Okay.
When I was a teenager, and just like I was just doing anything and everything. I was like offering free music, and that attracted all sorts of bad jobs and some slightly interesting jobs, most of which never came out and stuff like that. But I was just kind of like hungry to do some sort of work. And we had worked together on a game called Second Expedition, which never came out, which was a small game. I think Dan was in college, and he was working with another developer at that point. And I had written him a couple of tracks, and then he was like, well, I really like these tracks, but we're not doing that game anymore, and I'm doing this other game called Pony Island, and would you do the music for that? and he ended up using some of those tracks in that too. I don't know. I think that's been revealed somewhere. But yeah, there's like 2 tracks in Pony Island that totally were not written for Pony Island. They were written for this other weird mining crafting game.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then once we worked together on Pony Island, we've just kind of worked together since, and continue to work together. And it's just been a great working relationship. Yeah,
Sure.
And I've done some other work on some other stuff, but I would say at this point I mostly work for him when it comes to the game audio world. Like I did do some work this year on another. Am I allowed to say? I don't know if I'm allowed to say, so I'll say
Then don't. Yeah.
we announced AAA game.
Oh, nice. Okay.
On
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pretty sure I'm publicly associated with it, but they have like the craziest NDA of all time. So I'm like, better to not get sued.
Just save it, man. It's always safer. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So tell me about the palette for Inscryption, because, you did mention that there are some live instruments. There's guitar in there. It sounds like nylon string guitar to me, but it might not be. It might just be the way you recorded it or something. And then flute and some other things. But then, it does get kind of chiptune-y at times. There's all kinds of there's reasons for you to write music that's very synthy. So I'm just curious about the spectrum of the palette there.
Yeah, it's actually steel string guitar only.
Oh, it is. Okay.
But I do a lot of kind of tricks in different places where on the Trapper, for example, everything there is guitar, but it's pitched up in different pitch algorithms. So it sounds kind of like a mandolin or like a banjo, maybe. There's some different sounds of string instruments, and I kind of, in general, if I was going to reach for something in the kind of audio toolbox in Inscryption, I was going to reach for something that was going to be a bit weird and maybe even a bit glitchy or Uncanny Valley-esque. So that's why I liked the sort of artifacts of those higher pitched up guitars sound a little bit weird or a little bit uncanny.
Yeah.
And I think really the identity stuff of the different like what defines each section is more about the effects, actually. Like the part 1 is very much like acoustic instruments being processed with like kind of big reverb and weird warble effects and pitch effects and strange stereo field stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I guess part 2 is defined by just its chiptune. It's like 8-bit. I mean, they call it fake bit. I should call it fake. I have a friend who's like a super old school hardware chiptune artist. So that it, and he's actually not that militant about it, but other people like fake bit meaning it's not really on 8-bit hardware. I don't even. It's not even on 8-bit. I actually went back to. There was a very funny moment in. There's this guy that does. Inscryption IRL, which is like a Twitch channel where he has a whole like setup that's like the Inscryption thing, and he does like live streaming where he does like all the cards and the little like props and stuff, and they do like a charity live stream stuff. And he was gonna propose to his partner, which he did, and they're getting married.
Nice.
I would definitely would have heard about it if that went awry. They're getting married. He had me do a remix of the Scribe of Magic's theme as he was like, oh, can you do a remix for it? I was like, yeah. And I did the Wedding March theme, which is like, it's from, Mendelssohn, and it's like the wedding song. Yeah. And anyway, that all very long-winded to say, I was thinking in my brain, like, yeah, I did something really, I remember that track was like legit 8-bit, wasn't it? Like I have this like sample library that's like resampled tones from this software called LSDJ, which is like a Game Boy cartridge that you put in the Game Boy and you can secret music on it. And it's like superficial. And I have these like cool samples. And I think I used that for that. And I wonder if, and then I opened up the project and it's like, I had used the absolute cheesiest, like most unofficial way of doing chiptune, which is like using a normal synth and like a stock Ableton synth and then just putting a bit crusher at the end of it, like the stock Ableton bit crusher, so that it like sounds quote unquote like it's 8-bit, even though it's like really just like completely faking it. And I was like, oh, well, I guess no one else probably noticed either. If I thought that it was legit, then I'm probably fine. But that was just a funny moment.
That's fantastic. I want to ask about some specific tracks now. I know we've talked about a couple of specific tracks, but and these, again, it runs the gamut. I love how the music varies in this soundtrack. It keeps it really like engaging. Long Forgotten Moments, probably not the track I would have thought I would call out first, but it's very peaceful and pretty. And I'd love to hear you tell me about that track.
Yeah, I think Inscryption, I get excited when I have to write nice music for Dan because it's kind of rare. And I actually, like, I've become like the AAA job that I was talking about that I got hired for. I literally, like, this guy, called me up or emailed me or whatever, who I know, and was saying, oh, like, we'd really like you on this project because you're super weird and like creepy. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I've become the weird, creepy, horror, strange guy, which is kind of like not the type of music that I ever write outside of my job or anything. I mean, I really like it. It's super fun, but it's just such a funny kind of clash with what I would write just if you just said, write me something. But so is it Long Forgotten Moments? Is that the name of it?
That's what I wrote down. That doesn't necessarily.
No. This is not me saying that you
Let me look.
I'm thinking I don't know.
I'm looking it up. Long Forgotten Monuments.
Oh, Monuments.
That's what it says on Spotify.
4 monuments. Okay. Yeah. There's those 4 ones.
My bad. I typed it down wrong. Yeah.
We were both wrong. So that's and one of us wrote it. So, that was like just any time that I get to be like, oh, it should be a nice chord. Like, this is exciting, and I get to do stuff that's a little bit more like harmony focused. Yeah, that one was just like a super one sound, sit down at a keyboard and like kind of play with some pretty chords and then like maybe do another layer on top and then it's out. I mean, that kind of stuff usually just like comes out the first time that I try a little bit of stuff, it comes out, it's done. Easy.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of people have, this is anecdotal, but it seems like people have difficulty with happy sometimes. It's easier to write scary or dark than it is to write happy, Yes,
definitely Evil has a much more readable, like, it's easier to accidentally do happy as cheesy or saccharine or like hackneyed.
Yeah.
It's sort of hard to make stuff that is more genuinely like, oh, this isn't, we're not making fun of it. It's like, this is genuinely supposed to be a moment of pause that's pleasant and kind of introspective. And it's like, like you're telling me I can't just mash the keyboard and make a really ugly sound and put distortion on it and then like put that through a reverb and then play a tritone on top of it and be like, and it's like, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say on that note, which is interesting, sometimes what can be difficult is getting something to sound correctly ugly. Like if you have like a really intense, overpowering bass sound, for example, that's supposed to sort of take over a track, that can be a very difficult line to ride because what can end up happening is it just sounds like noise or it takes over the whole mix and it doesn't read. Like in order for something to read as overpoweringly loud, it has to be correctly balanced with the other elements so that it's just like overtaking everything else. If you actually make it incredibly loud, it will read as like it won't sit right. It won't feel like as big or as like colossal because it has to be kind of juxtaposed with something at a smaller volume scale or a smaller like feel. Yeah. But that can be really tough about writing. Like when someone's like, I want the craziest, most insane, distorted sound you've ever made. You have to like find a way to make it, you have to put it next to something that's not like that so that it shines in the context.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The Scribe of the Dead has this kind of repeated kind of melodic phrase that you will kind of compress or not digitally, but like in terms of,
like musical time.
Yes, thank you.
I'm gonna go listen to it so I can remember which track.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, okay. Continue.
Yeah. I love the rhythm here and how you kind of do mess with the meter. I don't want to use that word but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, talk to me about this track. I really, really like it. And when you said that you had worked with, samples and hip hop making beats and stuff, I'm like, oh, well, of course,
Yeah, I try to sneak it in. Like that's like me having fun. Like I'll write, the like that like eerie 8-bit chord progression, and I'm like, yeah, this needs like a trap beat under it. I'm just gonna see if I can slip that under the radar. Like it doesn't really like make necessarily sense that it's like a groovy like kind of like like a rap beat, but I'm like, yeah, this is cool. It's Describe the Dead. It's kind of creepy. Yeah, there's a lot of like. I like to play with how melodies start and end and like get interrupted and kind of offset. And that's something that's really nice about DAWs, like having like music software.
Yeah.
That you can make really bold decisions really easily. I don't know, maybe it'd be better if we were limited or something, but I think that's kind of like too much of a sort of musically conservative take where it's like, oh yes, no, it'd be better if you had to do. I like the idea that you can take something and just kind of like shift it around and cut it and like loop it back and then very easily make this thing that would be really difficult to kind of math out in your head and time it and do like playing live. But if you have the software, you can just kind of shuffle it up yourself. And the real example of this is the Scribe of Magics, which is kind of like a fan favorite, which I've talked about this before, but it's really weird to me that ended up being one that people really like, because that's where that one I specifically, the melody is a very awkward length and it doesn't respect the time signature of the rest of the track. So it just loops back over itself whenever it finishes. And that ends up with this weird phasing towards the normal rhythm, like rhythmic phasing. So like where beat one is supposed to happen, it's like the melody is somewhere else because it's looping on its own time. And that's really like, to perform that is quite difficult. And but to do it in the DAW, you just make it the wrong length and then you just kind of loop it there. And I felt like I was like, okay, this is like pushing it a little bit because like I really like this, but this is a bit of odd taste. Like I think some people would be find it unsatisfying, but people seem to really like that track, and I feel bad for anyone. I think one person has done a cover of it, and I'm like, oh, like that's tough. Like remembering where it comes in and keeping track of all the stuff in your head and like trying to do that. I respect that, and I'm sorry to say I never had to do that while writing it. So
that's awesome. Tell me about Botopia, because this is really long. The first track is as well. It just really sets you in this place, right? And you get to spend time in this mood. Botopia, I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced. It's just really improvisatory. It's just kind of this just conversation that you're having. So tell me about that.
Yeah, Botopia used to be like a third of the length. And this is where like games and game soundtracks start to become interesting, because this was one of the, like after the beta of Inscryption went out and we got some feedback, like one of the only there's obviously all the normal feedback, which is like, this sound is too loud, this sound should be changed, you need a sound here, all fine. And mostly people just like the music straight up. And the biggest resounding complaint was that like the track that wasn't called Botopia yet, but the part 3 ambient music loops too often. That was like the resounding, like the part 3 ambient music loops too often is driving people crazy. People are emailing me. It's like, people are like, I can't take it, it's looping too often. And so I was like, you want to see what loops often, buddy? Here's a 15-minute track or however long it is. And then it comes, now it's an OST and you're like, it'll be kind of weird if I just cut out a huge part of this because it's all in the game and that's the file in the game and like knowing. But basically, if you do that, what's going to happen is somebody else is just going to upload to YouTube the real secret,
of course,
scraped from the files, the real version of Botopia that they don't want you to see. That's like that happened with a bunch of like there was a bunch of tiny tracks that I didn't put on the OST because I'm like I don't think people want to hear this, and then like people scraped it and put it on YouTube, and everyone was like, oh, like why did they include this? And I'm like, all right, fine. So now those are in the Spotify release and will be on the other thing on the Bandcamp or whatever soon, or the I don't know if they're in. Anyway, but why is Botopia so long? And there's a whole I've definitely put this out in public before, but I like the story of it because it's fun, which is there's a sort of central motif in Botopia. There's like a beginning third, a middle third, and an end third. And the beginning third and end third are both like super ambient. Yeah. And that was like, I think I did a lot of stretching stuff out where I play something and then stretch it out. And all through section 3, the kind of to wrap around to something I didn't finish saying earlier, the sort of identifying effects in there are what should we call it? I think it's like shimmer reverb, which is this type of reverb. It sounds super airy and ethereal. It's like shimmer reverb, but then put through this plugin that is meant for vocal processing. It's called Alter Boy. And what it tries to do is it tries to pick out what pitch is being played and lock the pitch to that. It's like auto-tune, but it's much more. You wouldn't use it to try to like sound natural. It's an effect. It sounds kind of like this weird quantized robot voice thing. Yeah. So if you run something through that is definitely not it's meant to take monophonic signals. So meaning like there's only ever one note playing at a time. You couldn't put a chord into it and have it lock multiple notes. So when you put in like a really noisy, busy signal that has no discrete like pitch, it freaks out. And you can hear it freaking out when you hear those kind of weird like stepped, like something is like doing that. It's it trying to find where the hell the pitch is, which there isn't one. So it's sort of like glitching it out. Amazing. So that whole section, the beginning and end sections use a lot of that, and then the middle section, I decided to write like a Bach style invention. Which I'm not good enough at the piano to actually write one of those. But I did play it out and recorded it as best as I could and like wrote kind of a fake version of it, which to anyone, to any of the music professors out there that are going to use, this idea to justify learning Bach's voice leading rules, which I had to learn. No, I didn't do that, even though I had learned them. I just winged it and went and it like sounded fine. And then anyway, so that was a very short little like loop thing, and then that got exploded into like I don't remember like 8 times or 16 or 32 times its length, and then I put it into this weird like a reversed sort of string sound. I don't remember exactly what that sound was, but and processed. So that weird middle section with those kind of eerie, like swelling chords is the flip and reverse and then expansion of something that was like, I think it's like 10 seconds long. I should like find that and publish it or something or give it to you. I don't think I've ever actually like had people listen to the original like invention of that, which is really like it sounds not. I think it would be a fun thing to hear, like this little 10-second thing that then turns into something massive. Yeah, that's incredible. I'd love to hear it.
So you just mentioned that you're not a good enough piano player or something like that. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but what's your instrument then?
I guess guitar is my instrument. I also I love playing piano, and to me, especially like with synth stuff and with all of it, there's a huge amount of me playing piano in the soundtrack or like playing keyboard keys. Mm-hmm. It's more like Bach inventions are hard because you have to use 2 hands. Like they have to be doing their own things, and it's like not like I took jazz piano lessons, but but my jazz piano teacher was also into classical and would like force me to do some stuff sometimes, but like in a good way. Like we had a very good relationship, but he would also be like, yeah, hey, try this on for size, buddy. You're going to do Bach Convention 1. And it's like 6 weeks later, I'm like, this is really hard. But yeah, I would say guitars, like stringed instruments in general, are much more, that's where I feel like really home.
Okay.
And, yeah, I started mostly playing on a tenor ukulele, actually, like playing instrumentals and stuff like that. It's kind of how I got into music. And then at the same time, like starting doing production as well.
Okay. But then you said you went to music school.
Yeah. How much do I reveal about timeline of my life? Let's say that, I may have even been going to music school while doing some of the things I was talking about.
Okay.
I guess, well, was I? No, that's wrong. I graduated college and then started doing Inscryption directly after. So during college, I had worked on the Hex.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, maybe this might be a world exclusive. I don't know if I've ever laid out my timeline like that. But yeah, so then it was like graduating, and actually I moved to Greece like 2 months after starting the Inscryption stuff, maybe 3 months, and that was that was interesting. I went with like one guitar and one suitcase and one backpack, so there was a lot of limits on like the type of gear I had and like the resources I had.
And what was the connection there? What made you decide to move to Greece?
Actually, this is part of one of my other lives. I was doing a project there called Trust in Play, which is a urban game design project. Cool. So I designed like a large installation for an urban play thing. It was really fun. But mostly I had finished college early. I finished college a year early. Which is not that much of a flex because it was music school. So I just like, I kind of, it was more like I had done 2 years of college and then I was like, oh, I think I can just take like 2 extra classes and finish a year early. Okay. And they were like, fine, I guess. Yeah. They were kind of annoyed, I think. But then, so I had wanted to do a study abroad and I never did. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something else. And somebody had sent me the project and that also gave me a visa. So like, I ended up kind of milking that. Sure. Greek government, if you're listening, it was totally totally above board.
Yeah. You do, if I would hope people will visit your website to learn a little bit more, but because you do, like you insinuated in the very beginning, you kind of do have a lot of other interests and you like make things with electronics, and I mean, I don't know what are some of the other things that you do.
Well, my secret project that I've been working on is recently, which I don't think I've published stuff about, is a Eurorack synth module.
Oh wow,
is pretty exciting. That's been like a thing that I've been doing, which is it's got a clock built into it. And it's a rhythm generator. It gives you a new rhythm every day, and then it modulates rhythms with the moon cycle. And then there's a long-term modulation where, like, over the course of many months, it also like changes the ways that it generates rhythm. So it's going to be like a super long-term, super evolving kind of little like creature in module form that you play with and like gives you little rhythmic prompts. So that's been really fun and really hard. Other projects, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff on my website which is works.rip. I think I just am the type of person that likes to dip my toe in a lot of different stuff, but like dip it pretty far. Like I like to do like big projects of totally different types, and I think they really satisfy different aspects of my personality. Mm-hmm. And I guess the other thing that I'm working on right now is some writing about wandering in the city. I'm a big wandering person, and doing sort of different text-based games that have to do with ways of getting lost and wandering and going on sort of long, aimless, fulfilling journeys in urban space.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Let's get back to some of this music. I mean, Uberbot Activated was one of my favorites as well. So tell me about that track.
Yeah, that's a good example of the like bass, kind of crunchy
Yeah.
stuff that can be hard to get right because you can't just throw the kitchen sink at it and have it work. Something that to me always works really well in those kind of situations is starting out doing that like crazy stuff and then resampling it. So like then recording whatever you have and pitching it back down.
Oh,
And
interesting.
like,
Okay.
so like yeah, once it's become recorded audio and then gets re-pitched, there's some sort of little magic sauce in there. So I kind of approached Uber. I was into dubstep when I was like a kid, and I was always like in middle school. I was just trying to make dubstep all the time and failing. Like nothing ever sounded like dubstep. But I got into there's sort of dubstep and also complextro, which is like Medion or maybe like Porter Robinson. I don't know if Porter Robinson counts as complextro, but like there was a lot of that influence when I was younger of chopping up different samples like really quickly, or this sort of like hocketing thing, which is hocketing is like a old term for when you have like a melody, but each note is taken by a different instrument or a different section of the orchestra, and that happens a lot in electronic music of like the 2010s. So I think there was definitely I felt sort of like I had been doing some stuff like that when I was younger, and I like tapped into that, and I knew that it should sound kind of dubstep esque, but actually cool and not corny. And I'm always really happy with the groove at the end of that track where it turns into like a kind of four on the floor dance feel, those weird like breathing hi-hats. Like I think I often just like stick something in at the end of a track that's really not necessary just because I'm sort of riffing on it. And I'm like, well, I made this like weird like B section that's, a quarter of the length of the rest of the track and is kind of put onto the end of it. But I always like doing that.
Nice. Yeah, I really loved that track. And one of my other favorites, tell us about Golly.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Golly. The Golly uploading theme is
the
like
uploading theme too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Golly was fun. Like there's a whole there's like 6 tracks in the game that are all Uberbot activated, but like with different flavors. There's like an 8-bit one. There's like the Golly one is like a happy version of it, which it was very Wii inspired, like the Wii Shop channel
For
and
sure.
stuff like that. This kind of like strange like general MIDI bossa nova like weird vibes. And but I was so happy with how the Golly uploading theme came out, because I am a huge jazz fan and I love like writing that kind of stuff, and that's something that really rarely kind of comes across my desk, so to speak.
Yeah.
And also I don't really write in my own time. It's just like not really something I do much, but I've always loved it and had appreciation for it. And I really wrote that as kind of like almost like a jazz standard. And I'm like, if I'm like sitting down at the piano, I could like start to play that. I'm like, yeah, like that's like a legit chord progression, and I'm really proud of it, because that's something that sometimes I'm a little bit like, well, I make all this sound stuff, but can I still write like something that legitimately sounds good as like that kind of chord progression? And there's one guy that did. I'll have to find his name on YouTube to give him credit. Someone like almost immediately did a jazz guitar cover of the Golly uploading theme, which is really
nice. Good. That's great. Good.
God, if I can't find it, I'll give you the name later, and you can put it in the notes or something.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like that was I was very touched by that, and I was like, yes, it got the treatment it deserved.
Awesome.
It's still on YouTube. Maybe it got taken down. Oh, that would make me
no.
sad. Let's see. I mean, I'm very hard trying to have nothing taken down for copyright strikes, because I think you can post whatever you want.
Well, tell me more about jazz. I'm actually going to a jazz show tonight. It's a huge part of my life and has been a part of my career as well. So I'd love to know more about like what you, how'd you get into jazz? Who are you listening to these days? Like, what do you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, my dad is a huge jazz head, and I think from my upbringing listening to like we always had a turntable in the house, but like not in a, it was like before the hipster era of my dad has been listening to records like when they were the normal thing. Then when they totally died, he was still listening to records.
Wow.
Then now he's listening to like after them becoming hipster, he's still listening to records. But to him, it's just like, yeah, it's how you listen to music. Yeah, we actually just got him Spotify, so we'll see. Hopefully that doesn't kill the record collection. But yeah, there was always jazz in the house growing up, and I would say I didn't realize it then, but maybe like cool jazz was probably the predominant thing. And then when I was in high school, I was really into cool jazz, and also fusion. So like I was really big into Snarky Puppy growing up, and sort of the offshoots of that, like Bill Lawrence, and all sorts of different like fusion stuff and funk. And I played jazz. I was in like some jazz band stuff in high school. I was in like a funk band in high school, and I wrote some stuff for us. And I think jazz has always been like a big part of my listening experience. And then also on guitar and piano, that's kind of like the first like musical language for me, because I kind of rejected classical. I never liked classical. I really appreciate classical and I love classical, but the sort of style and methods of teaching it and of appreciation never gelled with me. And I think that's like how I learned, guitar chords and piano chords and stuff, was by playing jazz standards, and sloppily and badly. But even I think that's shared with a lot of people that become singer-songwriters and people that become composers, is that they used to do jazz band or they used to do jazz, and they miss like there's something, even if you are not going to be a professional jazz musician at all, or even play in front of people, there's something really satisfying about getting together, playing jazz standards, and just like it's this kind of like shared experience, and it's very fulfilling. It's a very like wholesome way to play music. In terms of like actual people, I would say Bill Evans was really big for me, and more recently like Kenny Burrell a couple years ago. I really got into Kenny Burrell. And then like it's always like whenever I'm like, oh, who do I listen to? Oh, Domi and JD Beck. That's my shout out of modern, is Domi and JD Beck.
Yes, I was supposed to go see them. They came here to Minneapolis on Halloween, and I couldn't because of a family emergency. But yeah, they've been on. I've been keeping a very keen eye on those two because they're so young, and I'm so fascinated by them, like writing these miniatures. I'm just really intrigued by how they approach composing. They're just like, no, I'm only going to give you 3 minutes of this, and then we're going to do something else, and it's going to be really fast.
And they're also, I think, to me, the biggest thing about Domi and JD Beck is that they're prodigies that write actually good music, which is such a rare combination.
It
when
really
you have
is.
the ability to do whatever you want and go as fast as you want and show off as much as you want, usually that burns out when they turn 17, and it's no longer impressive because other 17-year-olds or other 20-year-olds or whatever can do what they do, and it's no longer like you can no longer kind of parade this person around because they're 11 and they can shred blues guitar. But like Domi and JD Beck, it's like I was just so blown away by that album because it's so musically it's adventurous, but it really shows this kind of maturity of like kind of restraint in this really beautiful way where it doesn't feel nothing feels like it's being done for the sake of showing chops. It's always like chops in the service of it being really good music,
of it being really tasty. That's the word for it. It's all really tasty. Oh, awesome. Well, just a couple more things about Inscryption before I let you go, if that's okay. I really loved the reprise of the main theme, the Death Card Cabin, but you do it an octave lower. So I'd love to hear you talk about reprising the theme and what that was about.
Yeah, this is one everyone is always like, yeah, that's such an emotional part. And it's like, I don't think I really got to experience the Inscryption that other people did because I was, writing it during the thing and being like, okay, there's this, and this thing hasn't written yet, but like, this is going to happen, spoiler, and this is going to be the other thing. And Death Card Cabin reprise was such a funny moment because I had written the original in at my parents' house the summer after college. And like I said, I had like looked up this tuning that was like a tuning that was from this original. I don't think it's canon anymore. Like when the game was first being developed, Dan was like, it's set in Canada and and like, okay. And I was looking up this folk tunings from Canada and like doing all this stuff and like just recorded it. And as soon as I record something, I totally forget how to play it. Like as a rule, all the time. Like I can never, if you hand me an instrument and ask me to play you something I've written, I can relearn it by ear, but like I never have remembered anything once. So I was like in my apartment in Greece then, and it was the end of the dev cycle, and it was like, oh yeah, this theme needs to come back. And I was like, oh, that theme, right. What was that theme? Like so I had to go back and listen to the original track, and I was like trying to learn the melody, which is pretty simple, but I was like, what tuning is it in? And I just like, I think even I was going out, I was like, I had to get it in before some time. And I was like, I had to go to meet someone. And I was like in my room and there was like an ambulance passing or something. And I had to keep re-recording it. And I just kind of like, I did it a couple of times. And I remember specifically there being like dog barking in some of the takes. And like the best take, there was dog barking in. And I had to look at, I think you might even be able to find something in one of the recordings that made it
amazing.
But yeah, I think the octave down, I literally just like shifted it in an octave down in post processing, or something like that. Because it's in drop D on guitar, so you definitely can't go an octave. I'd have to look at it, but I think it is. I think it is shifted down, which also gives it that weird kind of like. It sounds different than if you actually played it on a bass, which is an octave down from guitar,
right?
Because you have that strange like. The algorithm has to do something with that like high end steel sound of the guitar string, which like, you don't. I guess you don't get the same sound like that on bass. I don't know exactly why, but just like bass versus guitar shifted an octave down are two very very different tones.
Sure,
but
sure.
Yeah, I just always think of that because I forget that it's a very touching, very like emotional, like slow moment in the game because I just think of like recording it and being like kind of all over the place and like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing, I do this other thing, and like, yeah.
Awesome, I love it. Jonah, is there anything else you want to say about the music for Inscryption?
It's really long altogether. You know, you put everything back to back. Let's just say for some, other developments that have been a long time coming in terms of formats of the soundtrack. Wink, wink. I guess the winking has already been like done on Twitter, so I can wink harder in real interviews. Wink, wink. For soundtrack, maybe wink available in other formats forthcoming. Been going on for a really long time with different like logistical stuff. But yeah, it's like I had to like put them all back to back, and I was like, this is really long, and it's kind of funny, but it's also really feels satisfying to have like a huge like tome of music, basically like, oh yeah, there's this massive 2-hour like epic that like I guess I did. Sometimes I feel bad for making like people listen to the entirety of Botopia. I'm like,
never.
Probably took me less than 7 minutes to write the 7-minute section because I wrote a small section and slowed it down by 5 times. Does that mean like people are like listening to this thing that took me like 4 minutes to write? Or anyway,
amazing.
but yeah.
It's so great. I had so much fun listening to it and so much fun meeting you and talking with you today. So I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. I'm very glad to be here. And as I was telling Emily before, I used to go to the PAX panels called Maestros of Gaming when I was like a teenager and ask questions of the composers. So this is very, very full circle and very, very feels triumphant.
It like, should be, yeah.
Top. This is the peak of game composering. This interviews from Emily.